Hey friends, so today we're using our Cricut Maker and mat board to make a cake topper. And not just any cake topper, we are making a wedding cake topper, a very special wedding cake topper. So last year I wrote a book, Handmade Wedding, and I made this cake topper. I made a ton of crafts that had like my family's names sprinkled throughout them. And so they kind of became very personal to me. And this particular cake topper was my grandparents, like it was supposed to be my grandparents. It was Mr. and Mrs. Wilson. And I was really excited about this cake topper making it into my book because my grandparents have already passed away. And unfortunately, the publishers wanted to change the cake topper to be something more generic because we ended up putting templates in the back of the book. And so I totally understood that, but I was really, really bummed. So I thought I'll make a video, I'll show my readers, I'll show everybody how to make this cake topper and of course make it personalized to you. It's actually super simple using your Cricut Maker Design Space and the Weld tool. So you are crafting with Kim Byers at the Celebration Shop and I'll be in Design Space. Okay, so now we're inside Cricut Design Space, and this is the original cake topper that you saw in the photo. Now I did this in Illustrator and brought it in as an SVG, but what I wanted to do is show you guys how to make your own. So how to do this with fonts available right inside of Cricut Design Space. Now if you have one on your computer that you absolutely love and you want to use that, great. But in the instance that you don't have one that you love, I thought I would show you guys a little bit. So I would suggest one of the biggest things is make sure you get a font that is chunky enough. So if we click on this font, you can see this is called Quirky Script, and then this one is Soiree, and this one is Friday. Now you want to size your font to some degree before you'd use the advanced letter. Basically this button is going to ungroup your letters. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to say, okay, each one of these, by the way, is 150. So 150, see, font size 150, 150, and you notice that they're all different sizes even though they're all 150 because they're very unique fonts and scripty kind of fonts. So I personally would either prefer to use Quirky or Friday, and I'm going to go with Friday, I think, just because it's a little closer to the font I used here. So I'm going to delete Soiree, but if you like that style, there it is. Now do notice though that it has a second layer, so if you do cut this one out, I would suggest that you either keep the undercut or you're going to need to make it much larger because see this little slits of cut here. Okay, we're going to delete that one. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and make this one 200 just because I like to have a nice size to work with. And see, it's about the size as 150 here. So I'm going to show you with both of these just so you get an idea because they're very different at connection points. So advanced, we're going to ungroup our letters. I'm going to grab the R and move it over. And if you can't see very well or you don't feel like you can see very well, just make your screen larger. Just go over and increase the size of the screen. And so I am going to try to make that a little more perfect. Okay, so now these two, we're going to weld them. Very good. Okay, so then we'll bring this one down and I'm going to advanced ungroup letters and then we'll move this one in. Okay, and then attach and weld. Okay, so now I just want to show you this. When I send it to the mat, you notice that these are together. Now for a cake topper, it doesn't work for them to be individual Mr. and then the ampersand and then Mrs. If you notice on this one, it's all one piece and they all connect, and it has to be a substantial enough connection to where it's not flimsy. The other thing is cutting it on the right type of material, but we'll get to that. For right now, we need to cancel this and finish out the rest of our items so that I can show you how to stack or layer those together. Okay, so now that I've seen them together, I am definitely going to go with the Friday font. Just remember, this one's quirky. If you want to use it, I am going to hide it. I'm also going to hide my original one in just a moment, but I want to make sure that I can kind of mimic it if at all possible. So let's go back over to text and make sure we're on the Friday font. Okay, and then we're going to do our ampersand. And that's another thing about fonts, you know, all of these characters look differently, and you might start on one and then say, oh goodness, that's not going to work. And you could always change out a different ampersand. So like what we're going to do for this one is I'm going to use this ampersand, now realizing these cuts are going to be really small. You see this in here? I'm going to use it for now, and then I'm going to go ahead and put my Mrs. on and Wilson, and I may come back and change this ampersand before I weld the entire thing together, just because it is a little curly, and whenever you're dealing with really thick materials like we are, sometimes that can cause problems when it gets really skinny out on this outside edge. Okay, so let's go back and we'll go to text and we'll type in Mrs. Okay, and remember when we were sizing this, we did this as 150. So I'm going to go ahead and make that 150. Okay, so let's scoot over a little bit. So we have our Mrs. I am going to go ahead and do an advanced ungroup letters, move this in together, and you'll sort of have to figure out where you think the font best connects, and then you could, I don't so much love, now it gets kind of wonky or weird right there, so I'm going to move that back out. May do more like this. What do you guys think? The R down a little bit. You see how it wanted to peek out this back side? Just watch for that, because once you get all this together, you don't want to have to undo it. So that might work. Okay, so Mr. and Mrs. I'm going to highlight the Mrs., weld it together, and again I'm going to keep my ampersand separate for now. Okay, so now let's do the last name. Whoop. Wilson. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and make that 150. Okay, I'll make this smaller again just so we can see it all. Okay, Mr., Mrs., and I did a little bit of stacking with the other one just because I was trying to help them connect to each other. And so see if we can connect it, although you want it to be legible. Let's not forget that. We want it to be easy to read, so we don't want it to be too curly and girly. Okay, so let's work with Wilson real quick. Ungroup those letters. Now this one's going to be a little challenging because we have an I, right? So if you have a name that also has an I, see this one I was able to connect the L to the dot so that it worked out a little bit better. I may make the S go up high. So again, my point with all of this is for you to be able to, think about your name, and you're going to have to play with this a little bit because you need connection points, and more than one if at all possible, so that, see this one's not going to work with putting the L there, but you need as many connection points as you can get so that the lettering is stable. And so as you're picking a font, just think about that. And if you can do this in Illustrator and bring it in, I mean, all the easier, right? But you don't have to. So if you're not savvy with Illustrator, this works beautifully as well. You're just going to have to play around with it a little bit. Now with the dot of the eye, I'm not quite sure what we would do with this particular font just yet. I mean, I could, whenever it cuts out, I could glue it sideways, like onto the side of the L, so that it's there, maybe even bringing it a little bit lower. But let's go now just really quickly and work with this ampersand real quick. So we are going to go back into text, and I'm going to put in the ampersand, and then I'm going to go up to my fonts. What were some of the other fonts we used? I looked at Quirky, because we want something that's going to be fairly chunky, again, so that it works with this font. Okay, so that's a much easier ampersand, right, to work with. So, and it looks a lot like our original ampersand. If we could put it right there. It's a lot less curly. Okay, so if this one, if we are thinking that's going to work, let's go ahead and weld it. Now, when you're pulling it up to your lettering, you want it to have as many connection points as it can. So Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, and we're connecting it with two letters in the middle, which is fantastic. We're connecting on the O and on the N. We could make the Mr., bringing it down and connecting it to the top of the W just for a little bit more. And we could even make the ampersand a little bigger and see how that might work. So it connects. So now the Mr. is connected to the Wilson, the Mrs. is connected to the Wilson, and the ampersand is connecting the Mr. and Mrs. Okay, and this works. These fonts are fairly chunky, and you could always cut it out on just a general cardstock at first to see any fragile points or where you might want to move things around, or if you wanted to try some chunkier fonts. I think this one would work quite well, but you're not quite done. So what we want to do is we want to take this, I'm going to delete that, I'm going to highlight the entire thing, and then I'm going to weld it. Now once you've welded it, look over, select it, and look over at your size. So depending on what size your cake is, I would say that you wouldn't want your cake topper to be wider than your cake, right? So what you're going to want to do is you're going to, if you have an 8-inch cake as the topper piece, and sometimes wedding cakes you have a 6-inch, you're going to want to reduce the width of this cake topper to where it's at least a 1/2 inch inside the cake on both sides. So for this, if it was 8-inch on top, I would just say that I wouldn't want it to be any bigger than 7. Okay, so it's 7 inches across, it's a little over 4 inches tall, and now since these are all one weld result, you can select Make It. And I didn't hide that one, but see how it comes to the mat? Everything's together, it's going to cut perfectly. And I would strongly suggest using like a white mat board. And I'm going to show you through some photography how I actually pulled this all together. I wish I could show it to you on the craft table like we do in all of our other videos, but this one, as I mentioned earlier, I actually made for the book. And so I have a ton of photos, but I don't have a video. But I am going to show that to you right now. So here we go. Okay, so this is a picture of my craft table when I was making this cake topper. So you'll notice I have my Cricut Maker, I have my iPhone with my design pulled up, I have a hot glue gun, some dowels, I have mat board, and I like to use the white just because it was easier for the paint to cover. And I also have a deep cut blade. Now, this was made before the knife blade came out for Cricut Maker. Get it. That is the knife that you want to use when cutting cake toppers. The deep cut blade did a pretty good job, but that knife blade is going to really get in those loops and grooves beautifully. Okay, now that we're on the actual machine and cutting, make sure that you have selected mat board in Design Space whenever you're selecting your materials. It's not the same as chipboard, it's thinner. So make sure you're selecting mat board and you should be just fine. You're noticing here that it cuts so well that some of the pieces are even popping out when we cut it. So just make sure that you clean that away as you work so they don't get up into your machine. So once my cake topper was cut out, I put it on a piece of cardstock and took it outside, well-ventilated area, to spray paint the topper. And so make sure that you spray paint front and back, guys, because people are most likely going to be walking around your cake and you don't want the back to be white and the front to be beautiful. But pick your color that's going to really match the florals in your wedding. That will be your base coat. So make sure that you paint it lightly. Don't get overzealous, just paint it very lightly multiple times. It's going to take a little bit of time to dry in between, but it is so worth the effort. And then once you have a really good coating of your base color, that's when you go back over it with this kind of shimmery gold or glittery kind of spray paint to give it a little extra pop. And for the final step on this project, you just want to add your dowel. So you're going to use hot glue and attach your dowel to the back of the cake topper. And just make sure that you do it cleanly, again, in case people see the back of your cake topper. But it's as simple as that, guys. You can have a beautiful, perfect, personalized cake topper in no time. Okay, friends, and so since I wasn't able to put my grandparents' cake topper in the book like I really wanted to, I ended up doing a more generic version that made the publishers happy, this Happily Ever After. And it's beautiful. It's available right now in Cricut Design Space. You can just search Kim Byers, or you can search Happily Ever After and it should pop up along with all the other images that I used in the Handmade Wedding book. And the book is actually available in Joann's and Michael's and on Amazon. I'll leave a link down below if you want to take a look. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed making that wedding cake topper with me, and I hope that you'll use your knife blade. And if you don't have a knife blade and you're getting married, if you do not have a maker and you're getting married, this should be your very first purchase. Honestly, if there was a Cricut back in the day when I was getting married, and that's dating me, that's putting an age on me, let's just say, but if there was a Cricut Maker back in the day when I was getting married, it would be my very first purchase. I would have saved so much money on all that personalization that I paid for. I just invite all my girlfriends over to the house and we would just craft. It would have been so much fun and I would have saved so much money. But if you have any questions about this cake topper, or if you have any questions about your maker or buying a maker, just leave me a comment down below, or even hop over to the site and you can email me directly and I'll do my very best to help you out with all of those things. And I wish you the very best, and I hope that your wedding planning and your wedding crafting is so much fun. You are with Kim Byers at the Celebration Shop, and I'll see you next time.